Thank you and welcome to the show today. The topic this morning is the impact of immigration on the state of Tennessee. And we have with us to talk about the impact of immigration on the state of Tennessee, our resident African scholar, as well as a person who has contributed information dealing with almost every continent on this particular show, Dr. Leonard Madu. And Dr. Madu, let me welcome you again to this show. And I think, as we've said on many occasions, we don't have to introduce you to our audience because they know you, primarily because of all of the excellent information that you've given us dealing with the third world, Africa, and some of the other ideas. And today I'm delighted to know that since immigration is such a real question in the nation today, that we can deal with the impact of immigration on the state of Tennessee. Let's start off by having you to make some statements in reference to that, Dr. Madu.
Well, when people think of where immigrants, will go to in the United States, they don't normally think of Tennessee, or some of the southern states. They think of New York, California, Texas, those kind of places, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, But Tennessee has a significant number of immigrants, due to the central position of the state, also the cosmopolitanness of Nashville, to stay with, because predominantly most of them are in Metro Nashville. Now, in the whole state of Tennessee, you have about 306,000 immigrants.
306,000?
Yes, immigrants in the whole state of Tennessee. Out of these 306,000, 106 are citizens. Then the rest, green cards and all that. The largest number of immigrants are Latino immigrants. And when I say Latino, we include people from Argentina, Bolivia, Peru, not just Hispanics, but Latinos. People from Ecuador, Honduras, you name it, they are Latinos. So they have about 47% of the immigrants, or about 146,000.
47% of the immigrants in the state of Tennessee. From the Latino,
Latino community, yes. People just say Hispanics, you confine it to Central America and Mexico, but Latino, the whole Latin America, Central America, all together. So that's 146,000, about 47%. The African community, about 27,000, or 8% of the immigrant population. Then the Asians have about 82%. 82,000, or 27%. And when you say the Asians, I mean Indians, Pakistanis, Indonesians, they're all Chinese, all together. They are 27%, of the state of Tennessee. Now, the single most contributing country, is Mexico. Mexico has about 31% of, the whole, immigrants.
Population in Tennessee.
Yeah, that's correct. Mexico, when you talk of one single country, apart from Latino as a whole, which Mexico is part. Now India is second with about 6.3%. You see a lot of Indian stores all over. Tennessee, they have about 6.3%. Now, surprisingly, the third largest group is El Salvador, with about 3.4%. People don't think of El Salvador when they think of refugee, immigrants in Tennessee, but El Salvador has a significant number of immigrants here, because during the 1980s, in El Salvador, there was a civil war between the government of President Duarte and the rebels, the Farabundo Martí Liberation Front. President Reagan was supporting the government of President Duarte. So with civilians caught in the middle, there was a need for refugees to run from the country. So the U.S. gave them, waived visas and all this for them, making it possible for them to come here. So a significant number of them, are in Tennessee. So they considered the third largest, individual groups. Now, So 4.8% of the whole population of Tennessee is immigrants now.
Okay, Dr. Dew, we're getting ready for this first commercial break, and then we'll come back and deal with this, exactly where we are now, because I think the information you're giving us is the information that we want to know, and you're talking about the numbers in terms and percentages in terms of the immigrant population in the state of Tennessee. And we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. Leonard Madu, and he's talking about the impact of immigration on the state of Tennessee, and he has already given us some numbers in reference to the percentage of immigrants and the impact that this percentage is having on the state of Tennessee. And Dr. Madu, let's pick up at during this second segment where we left off and to continue our discussion.
Like I said before, we have about 306,000 immigrants in the whole of the state of Tennessee. Out of this number, about 106,000 are citizens, of the state. And then you have the green card holders and all the rest. And then out of this number, 47% are Latinos. And like I said, when you talk of Latinos, you include those from South America, Argentina, Venezuela, Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, then those from Central America, Honduras, Jamaica, Guyana and all that. Then, El Salvador, Nicaragua, all of them. Latinos, 47%.
The Latinos.
Latinos. Then Africans, 8.9% of the, immigrant population, or 27,000 of them, Then Europeans, those from Europe, East and Western Europe. Some of them came here from East Germany and all those before. There are about 38,000 of them, about 12%. Then Asians, about 27%, or about 83,000. Now when you talk of Asians, you talk of, like I said, Indians, Chinese, Indonesians, Malaysians, Chinese, they're all Asians put together. And out of this, you have 4.8%, according to the last, information census, 4.8% of the population of Tennessee is immigrants. And the state population of Tennessee is about 6.4 million people, according to the last statistics. 3% of immigrants are registered voters. So you can see the impact that's going to have politically. So out of this number also, you have, when you talk of the children of immigrants, 82% of the children of Hispanic or Latino immigrants are English proficient. 92% of the children of Asian, families are English proficient. 95% of the children of African immigrants are, English proficient. So you can see, the Africans, the Asians, then the Latinos. And the African immigrants, most of them predominantly come from English-speaking countries. So they're already, used to English as a language. And then also those from Asia, like Indians, Pakistanis, Malaysians, they're also used to English language, rather than the Asian, the Latin American, immigrants' children. Now, the undocumented workers in Tennessee contribute or pay about $175 million in taxes.
$175 million in taxes.
Exactly.
These are the undocumented immigrants.
That's correct.
Folks that we really want to run out of town and don't want to believe that they're taking the jobs away from everybody.
That's correct. They contribute $175 million in taxes to the state of Tennessee. And according to labor statistics, if you have to run all the undocumented workers out of Tennessee, the state will lose about $3.8 billion and also 22,000 workers. So you know how big that is. Now, with the legal immigrants, or everybody put together, in 2010 or 2007 to 10, the purchasing power of the Hispanic population is $6.1 billion, the purchasing power. The purchasing power of the Asian, population was 3.8 billion. The purchasing power of the African immigrants were about 500 million. Now, on business and ownership of business, the Asian community owned about 12,000 businesses, generating a receipt of about 3.5 billion. The Hispanic community had about 9,000 businesses, generating receipts of about 1.6 billion. The African community, about 1,000 businesses, generating about 500 million. So you can see how much revenue immigration brings to the state. Okay.
It brings more than it takes out.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And then the 141 million that foreign students bring into the economy here. So you can see that it's a win-win for both sides, both the government and the immigrants, both legal and illegal. So that can tell you the politics of immigration.
Good.
Now, some people want them to go, but at the same time don't want them to go.
They got a mixed feeling in reference to there's so many of them, but we can't do without them. We need them.
Exactly. That's the contradiction. You think about somebody who has a construction business and say, okay, 80% of those who work for him are immigrants. Then if you run those 80% away, he doesn't have a job. There'll be no job creation. You see, so business people see it that way, and that's the problem in really dealing with it, because those who want it to stop are not those who really making money. Those who are making money don't want it to stop, because that's the way they make money. If somebody's going to pay somebody 50 cents an hour, why get somebody you are going to pay $7 an hour? You see?
Is that the kind of discrepancy that we're talking about when we talk about the wages that these individuals make, Dr. Perdue?
That's correct. That's correct. That's correct. Because a lot of them who cross the border, so to speak, quote, illegally, they will accept anything to work, to pay their bills and send money back to their family, whether they're in El Salvador, or Nicaragua, or Mexico, or whatever, or Honduras. So they don't really necessarily mind how much they are paid, as far as they are paid some, So that's advantage to employers. And think about those who have vegetables and all this to pick in California, in Texas. They need some people to do that work. And those who did that work before are not willing to do that now.
Yeah, and especially for those prices. Now, it's hard to get an American out into a vegetable field for 25 or 35 cents an hour.
That's correct.
Yeah,
that's correct. So that's the problem. So if those, they can get to pay them below minimum wage, can't do the work, then there's nothing.
Dr. Mudu, let us take this short commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. Leonard Madu, and the topic is the impact of immigration on the state of Tennessee, and he's given us some amazing figures in reference to the population as well as some of the activities that many of these groups are involved in, that simply leads us to believe that they play a significant part in the economy of the state of Tennessee as well as the economy of the nation. Dr. Madu, let's pick up where we left off in reference to that.
The last statistics show that the whole immigrants in the United States contributed $775 billion to the economy. Most of the new inventions, that MIT, Caltech, Harvard, are by immigrants, one quarter, of them. Most of the PhDs are immigrants. That's one of the reasons, the Silicon Valley and all this wants to keep them. Now, overall, why do immigrants come? Some of them come because of the conditions in their countries. Some of them are professionals, who've been, granted some visas, employment visas to be here. Some of them came also because of civil strife. For example, I mentioned the El Salvadorians. The Nicaraguans were also given waivers, to come here when there was strife in the country between the Sandinistas, and the United States government. A lot of them were given visas to come here. When there was problem in Vietnam, when the Saigon government fell, hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese were given visas to come to the United States. When Saddam Hussein was overthrown, hundreds of thousands of Kurds, were given visas to come here also. And in fact, Nashville has the largest number of Kurds in the whole United States. You have about 11,000 Kurds who were resettled here in Nashville, Tennessee. That's why they call Nashville the little Kurdistan. Or
Kurdistan.
Or the southern Kurdistan of the United States, because this is where you have the largest number. When there was strife in Somalia, after the overthrow of President Siad Barre, a lot of Somalis were given, visas to come to this country. That's why you have about 5,000 Somalis who are settled here in Nashville, Tennessee. People don't know that this is one of the largest Somali, community in the country. When there was strife in Sudan, the Southern Sudanese, the State Department also gave them a lot of visas to resettle here in the United States. About 2,500 of them were resettled here. When there was strife in Ethiopia, when Mengistu's government was overthrown and there was civil war, a lot of thousands of Ethiopians also given visas to come to the United States and stay. A lot of them ended up here in Nashville. Same from Uganda, same from Tanzania. Then in Asia, Malaysia, Singapore, Philippines, they all have agreements to a number of refugees or legal immigrants, every year to the United States. Now the problem we are having is that a lot of, those that the government wants to send back, to their countries have been here for long, established and all that, which is the 11 million we're talking about. But at the same time, this 11 million contribute a whole lot of money to the United States economy. And most of their employers actually want them to stay. Because without those workers, those companies will fold. You've seen a lot of companies shutting down here and there, before. Yeah, when a lot of when the deportation rate, was spiking up, a lot of them started going back, to Mexico or to Nicaragua, where they came from, until they stopped again and they started coming back. You see, so a lot of businesses, particularly the housing business, agriculture business, they need them because some of the jobs they do, most people won't do it for the price that the employers are willing to pay. Now if an employer is willing to pay somebody $4 an hour to dig ditches on the road, most Americans won't accept that, that kind of money for anything. How much more digging, ditches on the road? So when you have those people send them back, that employer loses a lot of money, and what happens? The company folds up. And you know that most businesses in this country are created by small businesses, who hire 10, 20, 30 people, 50 people here and there. And most of those small businesses need this kind of workers because the wages are not high. They don't have to pay social security and all this. They just pay them.
And sometimes it's paying in cash and just forget the whole thing. No tax records or no kind of records. And that's now, is that that's a real problem in terms of immigrant. Now, what about the labor unions in the state of Tennessee? How do they feel about this immigrant population, Dr. Madu?
Well, I think, it's twofold. The labor union supports legalization and paying them fair and adequate wages because you benefit the unions, instead of paying them under the table. So the union is strongly in favor of legalization. Exactly. But at the same time, doesn't want mass deportations because it will affect them too. You see? Because if a lot of those companies and organizations who belong to labor union are heavily influenced with the Latino population, particularly in California. You talk of the growers business and all this, they are predominantly from Latin America, you see. So the labor union is caught in between. But the best, policy is favor, legalization, but at the same time, fair wages for these immigrants. Because at times it becomes exploitation. See, when you use them and don't pay them adequately. But then most of them, since they're undocumented, cannot complain anyway. Okay, they won't complain. That's the problem. So even if they are not paid, they won't even complain for fear of surfacing and the authorities, getting them.
And so they're sort of under fear of not receiving the kind of adequate wage, but at the same time they're also fearful of the fact that if they make too much noise about it, then they might not have a job at all. And if they don't have a job at all, then they are almost automatically deported because of no wages, no jobs, and etc.
That's correct.
Well, now, Dr. Madu, looking over this whole issue, and I think we've talked about Tennessee, and I think the same thing could be said in reference to many other states, especially in the Southeast, etc. But now, when we talk about having a national immigration policy, what are some of the options that the government has now in reference to this policy?
Well,
we've got about 2 minutes.
The government has an option of, quite frankly, legalizing those already in the country. And that's what a lot of, immigration advocates want to see. It's difficult to expel 11 million people, most of them with families, wives, children, all this. It's just not going to happen that way, see? And that's why the government wants to legalize immigrants, within a certain space of time. Let everybody, have a green card or a temporary green card to see how they behave in so many years, and then you get a permanent green card. Then you can apply for citizenship. I think that's what the government wants to do. At the same time, there are some elements within the immigration bill that they are fighting over now that is unfavorable. For example, they want to drop what they call the lottery diversity visa. That would be unfair because a lot of Africans who come here, that's the only opportunity they have for legal immigration is that diversity visa. Okay, when the government drops that, then you deny them the right to come here because
yeah.
they're not, you know, Africa and the United States don't have contiguous borders. Africans can't cross. You know, they have to come through the ocean 11,000 miles away.
And so they have to have some kind of special visa in order to make sure that they have access to an opportunity here.
Absolutely.
And of course, Dr. Perdue, I think we're getting ready for the final statements in reference to this. And let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.
Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. Now today, the episode of the show will be facts of my death. Well, Dr. Haney's death. Now this morning, we have Dr. James Haney on the show. Now mainly you will see him in camera 2 and him basically doing all this. Now most of the time, I know that you see me doing the background education, but today we would like to see something about you. Now Dr. Haney, please give me in a real sense some of your background in education, little stuff about you and why we're here today.
Very good. One reason I wanted to deal with this today, Alana, we wanted to call this the facts of my death. And I think that what we've done, we've sort of laid the foundation by having you who will be able to give us information in reference to what happened. It all goes back to the 15th of January of 2013. It appeared that my wife was in some distress. She was having some problems with her leg, and it was decided
torn
tissues in her leg. And why don't you give us some information in reference to how that occurred?
Well, on the morning of January 15th, me and you were getting ready to go to school. Well, you were getting ready to take me to school, and then you'd go off to work. Now, when I was walking past my grandmother's room, I heard her in distress. I heard her crying. So I went into her room, and I said, "Grandmother, are you okay?" And she was like, get James, because y'all will need to have to take me to the hospital because she had torn tissue in her leg. And now, after we had put her in the car, and then we went off to the Summit Hospital in Hermitage, Tennessee. When we arrived at the hospital, the doctor started running tests on her, asking her questions, and me and you were just kind of watching and waiting, being pretty nervous. Now, as she went off to her x-ray, I went, "Hey, Papa, let's go get some hot chocolate," because I'm pretty thirsty. So we went down to the lower level of the hospital and got some hot chocolate. When we came back up, my grandmother was coming back from her x-ray. And now, as I remember, you were sitting in a chair quite like this, and then you crossed your fingers like this and put them to your chest, and you kicked your feet up on the bed, and you went, "Y'all, I need to take a nap." And so basically, we were like, I was like, "What? Where you gonna take a nap?" I mean, really, you said I need to lay down and take a nap, and I was like, "Where are you gonna lay down?" I mean, my grandmother had the bed, your wife. She had the bed, so I'm like, where would he lay down? And then at that moment, your mouth opened, but nothing came out. And then your eyes rolled to the back of your head, and you started foaming at the mouth. So after that, you started shaking like you were like freezing, shaking, like you were scared and freezing all at the same time. And so I shook you. I was like, "Papa, wake up, Papa," because you weren't moving anything. Your mouth was open. You were foaming at the mouth, and your eyes were completely white. You were just shaking. So I was like, "Papa, wake up, Papa." And then after that, I flew out the door. I basically ran out the door, and I went, "We need nurses. We need doctors. My grandfather, he's having a heart attack. Help us." And so they ran back into the room, and then there was this one nurse, and she had stopped in the room and said, "Oh my God."
And so let me interject here, Alana, during this first segment, because at this point I had literally lost my consciousness. I was no longer able to understand anything, and not only had I lost my consciousness, but when the doctors from across the hall reached the examination room, they found my wife still on the bed, but at the same time they found me unconscious and
in a chair.
And they immediately put onto the end of my finger a machine that indicated that
would read your pulse on a machine that was about over there, to the right of me.
Flat out. It flat out indicated I did not have a pulse.
Line, like you were not alive. Like, because a live person, everybody has a pulse. If you're alive and walking and breathing, you have a pulse. I have a pulse. At the time you didn't have a pulse, but you now have a pulse.
Nor did I have a heartbeat as we entered this end of this first segment.
As every living person does.
And then I not only had I lost my consciousness, but I also lost my pulse, and I had lost my heartbeat. And so the issue for the next 13 minutes was dealing with getting me back into life. And so it took 13 minutes. And so we're going to take this first commercial break, and I appreciate you opening this for us because I think that you gave us some good information in reference to it. But when we come back, what I want you to do is to pick up at the point where I literally lost my consciousness, my pulse, and my heartbeat, and some of the activities that only you were able to see because everybody else was rushing around. And we'll be back with you following this very, very short commercial break.
Welcome to the second segment of the show. Now, this show basically focuses on Dr. Haney's death and resurrection. Now, if you're just tuning in, we basically discussed us going into the hospital and basically him losing his consciousness, his pulse, and his heartbeat. Now, where we left off was one of the nurses stopping in the doorway and saying, "Oh my God." And that was basically when they picked my grandmother up off the bed and they placed you onto the bed. Now, after they placed you onto the bed, they put their hands together like this and they started doing chest compressions on you. While one was doing chest compressions, another put a little machine on your finger and hooked you up to a pulse machine. And while one was doing that, another was still doing chest compressions. And then while they were doing that, they were feeling your neck, your head, and all this other stuff. And it was so much commotion in the room because there were about 7 nurses. Seven nurses, me, my grandmother, and your dead body. And so being in a room with 9 people in a dead body is not very comforting, especially if it's your grandfather's dead body. So back where I left off. When the nurse stopped and said, "Oh my God," she had basically realized that you were dead. Well, in the process of dying. Basically like we all realized. So as they hooked you up to that machine, your pulse was a straight line. Like there was no pulse. You had no pulse. And then one lady felt your heartbeat. You had no heartbeat. You were basically a dead person because dead people don't have heartbeats. Dead people don't have pulse. And dead people don't have consciousness. They're dead. That's the whole point of being dead. You don't live. And so after about 10 minutes of you still doing chest compressions, of them doing chest compressions on you, my grandmother weeping and screaming and crying, and me sitting there shaking you and begging you to wake up, I stepped outside of the room and I got my iPhone out and I texted my mother and I said, "Mom, Papa just died." And after I texted her that, I texted my cousin saying, "Jordan, there's been a family death." And he had said, "Who died?" And I said, "Papa." After that, he didn't respond. And after about 2 minutes more, going into 12 minutes of them still beating on your heart, a nurse had reached for a cover to pull over your face to basically pronounce you dead. And she had it about to right here when you woke up, basically. And when you woke up, your pulse started turning from a line into zigzags, and you were moving, you moved your fingers, you blinked, you were looking up and down and everywhere, and then you started laughing. You were like, "What are y'all doing to me?" And I was like, "Oh, thank you, Lord, you brought my grandfather back." Now, what I want to ask you is, how did it feel in that moment when you were dead? Like, did it feel long? Did it hurt? What did you experience? What did you hear? What did you feel? What did you see?
Alana, it's almost impossible for me to really get my mind around this experience, because it was both a physical experience, and I think it was witnessed as a physical experience by all of you in the hospital at the time. But as far as I was concerned, it was a period in which I had lost consciousness, and I was in a period of complete darkness for a long time. But at the same time, when I came to see the situation that I was in, it appeared that on the right-hand side, I was laying down on my back in front of the pearly gates. And on the right-hand side was Jesus Christ, and on my left was St. Peter. And it appears that from what I was able to later reconstruct through my own consciousness, it appears that Peter had called me up in the sense that he had the responsibility of calling people out of life into death. And now, I know that might sound strange and all of these images and etc., but nevertheless, that was the experience that I had been called up. And another thing that was very, very peculiar to the situation is that while he had called me up, it seems that I was experiencing what might be considered the everyman experience of death, because I was in front of the pearly gates on my back with Peter on my left and Christ on my right, and Peter reading what I considered to be for a long time an obituary of me. But later on, I was able to sort of filter it out, and I was able to come to the conclusion that that indeed was my page in the book of life. That is, that each person that dies has a page within the book of life, and that he literally read my page. As a matter of fact, I think, as the prophets say, he told me everything that I had ever done. And even now, I can graphically depict some of the things that happened in my earlier experiences growing up, and that Peter, in a real sense, had, when he came to the end of this page in my book of life, Christ responded, "Send him back." And of course, that's when Peter went into a real dissertation in terms of my efforts and why I ought not to.
I'm sorry to kind of inject this, but when you mean dissertation, what do you mean? Like, what did his voice sound like? Was he mad or sad or agitated or just calm?
Everything seemed to be very, very calm. The whole experience was that I didn't see either of the two, but I felt that there was Peter on my left and that Christ on my right, and that since I had been called up and Peter had read my page in the book of life, I was able to somehow understand that was sort of the usual experience. But what was unusual about it was, after that had been read, Christ declared, "For